Hi everyone, this is Jen again at JFF. We're going to go ahead and get started. And just a reminder, we do record these virtual meetings, so if people join a little bit late or if you have center staff that can't join you, we'll send out the recording afterwards. So thank you all for your patience. I know this is, we're not technically in quarter one anymore, but we're doing our quarter one webinar today in April. We wanted to present a few topics to you today that we were have more updates on a little bit later. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Becky to do a few webinar housekeeping items before I kick us off with the agenda.
Great, thanks so much, Jen. So just a quick reminder, because this is a smaller group of people, we have not muted you upon entry. So if folks could please make sure to mute yourselves when you're not talking. We do encourage you to participate. You can ask questions via the chat box by clicking the little round chat icon at the bottom of your WebEx screen. We are recording this webinar, as Jen mentioned. Any technical issues or difficulties, please feel free to privately message me via the chat box, and we'll get you sorted. Thanks.
Awesome. So on the next slide, I'll just quickly go over our agenda. So we're actually going to hear from the members of the network leadership team for the bulk of our virtual meeting today. But the JFF team will take a few minutes at the beginning to go over some business updates and items for you all. So I'm just going to dive right into those business updates. Awesome. So you can follow along if you're logged into WebEx. You'll see the slides on the screen. And like Becky said, just feel free to, at any point, put your questions in the chat and we'll read them out to the group. So I want to start with a quick update on our July Student Success Center meeting. So I know you all received the RFP for our post-secondary network meeting in July. So I just wanted to accompany that with a quick update on the Student Success Center network meeting. So you should be receiving registration for both of those meetings in July, later this month in early May. But just a quick update, so the morning of that meeting, so it's that Tuesday, we'll focus on the work of the Network Strategic Plan Action Committees that we're actually going to spend a lot of time talking about today. So that will be some work time for those action committees. And then the afternoon, like last time and as typical in these meetings, we want to provide space for center executive directors to invite 1 to 2 strategic partners to join them. People who work with you on executing your center strategy and operations, so you can begin to think about who you want to invite to join you for the afternoon. And the afternoon topics will be a mix of both center operations topics as well as guided pathways and helping your college implement pathways topics. Some possible session topics that we're talking about are equity, so how centers are applying equity data, the center's role in the state on equity topics. We're also thinking about workforce alignment as well as teaching and learning and some other center strategy topics. And we know those have been coming up and there's a lot of interest from the centers and you all in talking with one another. So we definitely want to prioritize that peer learning at this summer's meeting. And we also, so this, as I mentioned, is our quarter one webinar a bit late. So we'll have the quarter two webinar virtual meeting in June. So we can also use that upcoming webinar to help us prepare for the July meeting and to dive into some of those peer learning topics as well. So you will receive more information in the registration, again, later this month or early May, but just wanted to give you a quick update on what we're thinking and what we've been brainstorming with you all as far as topics and attendance. So the next exciting update I'll go into is the executive directors or state policy leads for your state all received the state policy scan this morning. So our colleagues, so Dave sent you the email, and Dave and Ashley worked with our consultant, Cynthia Linston, over the past few months, and you were all on validation calls, and this was the product of a lot of months of hard work, so we're really excited to share this with you. So if you have questions, I would direct you to first your center executive director to get some of those files from your state, and then feel free to contact Dave and Ashley with questions. I just wanted to give a quick preview of what's in the email that you all received this morning. So as a reminder, the scan hopefully provides a lot of actionable intelligence to support your implementation and scaling work in your states. And we're hoping that the results of this scan can help you set policy priorities, and advocacy strategies in your state. I know a lot of you are in legislative sessions right now. So you receive 3 documents that should help you with this. So the first one is an Excel spreadsheet, and this gives you the annotated state-by-state results. So it includes some notes and sources for each policy indicator. The second document is a handout. So this is a revised version of the handout you actually all received at our Austin January meeting. And this presents some simplified state-by-state results for each indicator. And then lastly, in the email, there's a slide deck which presents the results in aggregate, as well as some background information on this process. So just a reminder that JFF is keeping all of this information confidential and internal to the network. So we are not sharing this level of detail publicly. However, the executive director of your state, of your center, or the policy lead receive this information, and you're free to share as you wish with whoever you don't mind seeing that level of information. Just a note that we're keeping it, this version of the scan is internal to the network only. And that said, this summer we're going to publish a national report, so a public report that will be based on the results of this scan, but that report will not disclose identifiable state-level data. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to respond to the email. We're really excited that we were able to share this with you and hope it will encourage a lot of network-wide learning, and then we'll also be excited to share that with the public later this summer. So I'm going to have my colleagues Andrea and Lexi help me with a couple more updates. I did just want to say quickly that we'll be sending out our usual Student Success Center Digest email early next week. So that will recap some of this information and have some important links about other resources, including the recording of this webinar. So stay tuned for that early next week. And as you've all been doing, feel free to share with us your feedback on that or if you have any technical issues in receiving that. So I'm going to let Andrea handle our next update for the network demonstration project.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. It's Andrea Juncos here in Boston. So my colleague Naima is not here today, who is leading our network demonstration project. We were all involved, so I wanted to share a brief update, which really will be short from me, but I wanted to invite 2 of our network colleagues, Susan Barbita in North Carolina and Laura Rittner in Ohio. We want to share examples from the network demonstration project. So we'll be doing this on an ongoing basis, having centers that are, as their plans are taking shape for this project, sharing some examples with the group. So this is just a first kind of preview of that on today's call. So before I turn it to Susan, we'll start with you, just giving you a heads up. I just wanted to share that all of the, we've, as you know, from different communications over the last couple of months, we invited 7 cohorts from 7 states to participate in this project. And each of those 7 states is in process of designing what their projects look like. People are in different places in that process. Some are still confirming participation, and others have had a little bit more time to start planning what the project will look like, including some early conversations with providers. So as you know, one of the main focus points of the project is learning for the network. So we wanted to hear some brief examples today, and why don't we start with Susan, if you could share just a little bit about how the project is taking shape in your state and what you think your center and the network can learn from that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we are just in the early stages of defining exactly what it is we'll be doing, but it really takes 2 sort of different paths or prongs, if you would, of if you can kind of vision it, prongs of fork. But one is centers around our teaching and learning for the state. We are going to be working with NC State University and the Belk Center for Community College Leadership and Research in developing a 15-module online course that will be used for onboarding all new faculty in the state. We will also be including a series of face-to-face workshops. We've previously already held one of them on reverse course design and syllabi design. We'll be holding another one in June on equity in the classroom that's being presented for us by Washington State, Pierce College, And then we'll have a series of workshops like that. But the main component is this 15-module onboarding course for new faculty. We have some presidents on our committee, of course, a couple of students, and primarily faculty. So we're excited about being able to move forward with that. We don't have anything in the state that even comes close to approximating a statewide onboarding experience for faculty, and it will be available to all of our faculty, including adjuncts, continuing education, and basic skills. So that's one prong of our efforts. The other is a little more focused on the 17 colleges that were part of our first cohort, and there are three really components to this. The first is that we're going to offer them the secret shopper experience for something associated with their front door, and we will let our colleges really decide what that is that they want to focus on, and then we'll be able to provide the experience to them. And that will, of course, they'll receive a report on that. All the 17 colleges in our state will receive a redacted report on all 17, and then we'll be able to share that statewide and with whomever else might want that. So we're excited about that. We are going to be having two of our more seasoned coaches work with the 17 colleges, reviewing their SOA again and identifying 5 areas that they feel they'd like to receive technical assistance on or some sort of support. And then from that 5, narrowing it down to the 1 to begin with, and furthering to specify the type of delivery or the modality of delivery for that technical support. So some of it might come from our other colleges, those that are colleges that are fairly far along in the pathway and the mapping process might go to another one of our institutions. It might be a college that hasn't really been completely engaged for that long, needs someone to come and create that sense of urgency and get everyone excited about it, and that would be more along the lines of a national partner. We suspect about a third of our colleges will want some sort of IR support, and that will vary also depending on the institution. So we're excited about it because it lets the college make an informed decision with a coach about an area to receive technical assistance in and the method of how they receive the technical assistance. So that's the sort of the next component of it. And then a little bit more in terms of ongoing institutional research support, especially for our smaller colleges. And when I say ongoing, that might mean, a couple hours of a phone call once a week. It might be a site visit for a couple of months. We're really right now defining what those parameters are, and we'll be giving our colleges a choice of the type of technical support that's available, so we don't run into a situation where we have one college that needs $10,000 worth of support. But we don't have the ability for any pass-through funding or pass-through grants in North Carolina, and so this will hopefully be the next best thing in allowing them to move their guided pathways work forward a little more quickly than perhaps. So as I said, we're just in the planning stages of all of this, but we're moving, so we're excited about that.
Great, thanks, Susan. That sounds like an awesome set of work and activities, and we're eager to continue learning with you. I know these are topics that many of the states are grappling with as you go, so thank you for sharing that. Does anyone have any, I know we don't have very much time, but just wanted to see if anyone has a clarifying question for Susan before we move on. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. So Laura Rittner in Ohio would love to hear about your project as well, how that is taking shape and what you have learned.
Great. Hi, Andrea. Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're planning. We are also, I would say, in the early stages somewhat, but we've been making some progress. And it sounds like there are some similarities between what we're planning and what Susan is working on in North Carolina. So we have all 23 of our colleges committed to Scaling Guided Pathways. So when we were exploring the participation in the demonstration project, we really wanted all 23 to be part of it instead of, cohorting or selecting a smaller set. So we're looking at how we can make sure that all 23 are taking advantage of some of the technical assistance and support services we're offering over the next year to 2 years. And we've been doing a lot, so we've learned a lot. And one of the things that we've learned is that we need to give a little bit more structure to some of the on-campus engagements. We have great participation, pretty much 100% across the board at our statewide institutes that we've been doing, but we don't have every campus engaged in some of the on-campus support. And so we're trying to figure out why. And one of the reasons we think is that we allowed too much flexibility, and so we want to move more towards a menu of options. And so without going, way down into the details, we have these big priority areas where we have coaching support. So this connects very much to our Pathways coaching. We have the first coaching group that we developed is around the use of data for decision making and building IR capacity. So that remains a priority, and we have a cadre of data coaches. The next one that we formed with support from JFF and connected to our Achieving the Dream Advising Redesign Institutes is around holistic student support. So we have 6 coaches with a lead coach working in that area. Actually, each group has a lead coach. And then we're forming a third group. We already have several coaches recruited, and they will be working on faculty engagement, change management, and developmental education redesign. And we have a lead for that. So we have these coaching groups and leads for each, and then across all 3 areas, we see some threads around particularly equity and how we engage our different students. And so we're looking at equity in a couple of different ways. We obviously want to serve our minority students and low-income students and work on closing gaps. But then we have some other populations that the colleges are telling us they're concerned about, including adult learners and our rural students, particularly rural students living in poverty. So we want to use the demonstration project to add some really specific workshops and things that can be led by either our coaches or an outside expert, or potentially a pairing of one of our in-state coaches with someone from a national organization. So we've started having conversations with organizations like the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity and talking to them about, again, as Susan was saying, there are a lot of different prongs to the approaches, but we want them to potentially offer workshops or institutes that could be delivered on campus, but we're also pushing them to think about train-the-trainer models where our coaches would be certified to lead some of their content and materials on campus. And so we're excited about this. We think that the colleges are going to respond to it well. We've had a number of conversations with them this spring, working directly with the college officer groups, particularly around equity. They're asking for support with leading conversations on campus. And so we think we can fill in services there. And in addition to talking to the officers, we are in the middle of doing a round of check-in calls with every college. So we have done 5, I think, already, and we'll be trying to talk to the majority of the colleges. I don't know if we'll get to all 23, but over the next couple of weeks. And we have a standard agenda that we follow where we talk to them about using our engagement dashboard. We can see where they've been engaged. So we're talking to them about what they've done already, and then kind of rolling out this new strategy of our priority areas and the services that we can provide, and everybody seems really excited about it. So we're using those one-on-one calls with the colleges in addition to survey data and things like the scale of adoption assessment and the KPI data that we have for all of the colleges as well. So that's where we are right now. We're excited. We want to make sure that we continue to meet the needs of the colleges, and we see this as a way to really be able to respond to them better. And I'd be happy to answer any questions now or offline.
Great. Thank you. I think that it's really exciting to hear in both cases how the project is building on the work that's already been underway and kind of integrating coaching work. So it's really exciting to hear about this, and we look forward to learning from both of your states and from the rest of the network, as we know many folks are working on these areas as well. So that's part of what our peer learning conversations in July will focus on, several of these topics, so we can really have that learning across the network. Yes. Let's see the question.
Yeah, so Stacy is wanting to know who at the colleges Ohio is having the coaching calls with them.
Okay. Did you catch that, Laura? Who at the colleges are having coaching calls with?
Yes, so the check-in calls that we are doing right now are with the Student Success Leadership Institute teams, and that is typically led by the provost and the VP of Student Affairs, and then they're invited to bring as many of their team members onto the calls as they would like. So usually we have an average of probably 4 or 5 people on the calls. And then we also have, it gets to layers of complexity. So I mentioned we have leads for each of the areas. We also ask the colleges to identify leads in each of those. So if we have follow-up conversations specific to, say, holistic student support coaching, that's when our lead would step in and talk to whoever the lead is for that at the college.
Great.
Laura, thank you. The reason I ask that question is because there seem to be different models emerging across the centers as they're executing their coaching, and that relates to both expert coaching but also general coaching engagement. So thanks for sharing. I know we all have a lot to learn from each other. Thanks.
Thanks, Stacy. And I mean, there are definitely bottlenecks on our campuses, which is another thing that we're learning. When we talk to people who really want more implementation support or implementation coaching, often they don't know about something that we've been offering to the college for a year or more. So we're still trying to figure that out. But beware of the bottlenecks.
Okay. Thank you so much, Susan and Laura, and we'll, as we said, continue these conversations as time goes on. So I'm going to go to the next item in our agenda and be super quick because I want to make sure there's enough time for the bulk of our conversation about the strategic plan. So I think on Monday, next week, we will be sending our next digest, as Jen shared. In that digest, we're going to share a revised summary with kind of the recap of network services available. So all of the states have been, actively engaging in different services over time. So we wanted to just remind you that we still have services available in several areas, some of which we have highlighted in the digest with different examples, and we'll continue to do that in the next one. But just wanted to point out the communication services with next chapter, our policy and advocacy services with JFF and our team of internal and external policy consultants. We also have the Center Strategy and Sustainability Services with Chris Baldwin Consulting, and we also have a new offering that Lexi's going to share in a moment in that area, as well as our data and evaluation work with ASA Research in terms of strategic data use. These are some areas where we still have resources in our current contracts and wanted to just make sure we're reminding everyone who has interest and need, and if these are your priority areas, to reach out to your state lead to talk more about that. At this point in our work, we also have some limited resources remaining with our current contract with the Aspen Institute on change leadership. We know that's been a very popular area that a lot of states are working on, so I think like 9 or 10 states have taken advantage of that. We still have some resources there as well, so please talk to your state lead if you have interest, and especially if you have not yet engaged. And then finally, there are a couple of service lines such as our holistic student supports work, advising redesign, as well as the work supporting underprepared students. These are areas that many states, again, have taken advantage of the offerings in terms of our current contracts in this grant period. So those resources that we have in those areas in terms of the network-wide services are committed at this point. Many states have engagements already planned for the spring and fall. So I just wanted to share, and the coaching work is another example of that. We know that many states are in process with their coaching implementation grants and coaching learning grants. So these are some areas that are in process, but that the resources for those services are already committed in the current period. And then I'll just end with, we will, again, this summer be sending our annual survey to you all to understand more about your needs, around services and engagement in the network overall. So we are continuing to have our ongoing process of learning and understanding needs in parallel with the strategic plan for services going forward. So I'm going to stop there, and we will hear from Lexi with some new services, and please direct any questions to your state team.
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everyone. It's Lexi Waugh. I am excited to build on Andrea's talking points and share 2 new services that we're really excited about and have been created very much from demand in the network and conversations with each of you. So the first, we will be sending this out in the digest that we keep referring to that will go out in a week or so. We have created a learning exchange opportunity. So this is really a way to build on what a lot of you have already been doing on your own. We know, for example, that some centers have joined other centers at their events, whether it's an institute or another convening, and that, Susan mentioned Pierce College. She took a team out to Washington for a visit to the center and their colleges, and now a team from Pierce is coming to North Carolina to lead a technical assistance opportunity. So these are great opportunities to learn from each other and to share and to craft cool things like that. So we are building this out now. We've created a form that folks can fill out if you're interested in a learning exchange opportunity, and you will receive a small stipend to support however you are defining that opportunity. So again, information will go out next week. Feel free to reach out to me directly or to your state team for more information, or if you want to think about what's the best way to use this, what should this look like, and again, we'll send out more information on that soon. And if you have questions now, feel free to throw those into the chat. The second piece is a new set of services from an existing and well-loved provider, NCII, aka Rob Johnstone. So Rob and his team are able to offer some new center capacity building services around helping centers to identify and refine technical assistance strategies for supporting your colleges that are doing all of their great work. So that can look a number of different ways, but the basic thrust of that is working with NCII to think about what are specific implementation and scaling questions that you're trying to answer as a center and your colleges are trying to answer on the ground, looking at current TA strategy and design and thinking about recommendations for any changes you might want to make. Do you want to switch from an institute strategy to something else, for example? Do you want to begin implementing an institute strategy if you haven't done that previously? So this is just added capacity support to think through some of those questions. So if you are interested in thinking about what that looks like, please let your state team know soon. Rob has dates open on his calendar, and we can help coordinate get that type of event and getting together and thinking about what that strategy might look like. So again, if you have questions for now, throw those in the chat. We'll send in more information out about that in the digest as well, and always feel free to ask anything of your state team. The last piece that I'm going to do before we transition to the presentation from the network leadership team is actually a very, very quick update on the network leadership team's second phase. So we are going to launch that later this year, and I just wanted to give a very, very quick heads up that we'll be sending out the letter of interest form for joining the second phase in May. So be ready and on the lookout for that, and we're hoping to announce 2 additional members to the NLT while we are all together at the SSCN summer meeting. So again, more soon. Just wanted to give everyone a quick heads up and make sure you're all reading the digest. So with that, Becky, if you could move us to the next slide. I'm going to do a very, very brief intro. We're going to have the current and inaugural phase of the network leadership team, Cynthia Farrell, Greg DeSantis, and Jennifer Miller, go over what's been happening with the network strategic plan since we were all together in Texas in January. And so we'll start with some context and background just to refresh everyone's memory, and then we'll talk a little bit about changes that were and tweaks that were made to the objectives and measures. And we'll end with what I think is the most important part, the plug to get all of you involved in continuing to build out the network strategic plan. So I'm going to move it to the next slide, and Cynthia, kick it over to you.
Thank you, Lexi. And hello, friends. I'm glad to be talking to you again about the strategic plan. It's been a really cool set of activities that has led us to this point that I feel really good about our network and who we're becoming together, and the camaraderie and the collaboration around the strategic plan. So if you remember back in July, so not quite a year ago, we did some brainstorming together at our July meeting, and then in January, the leadership team came with the draft that we went over with a fine-tooth comb together, and you made a lot of good suggestions on it. And so just this last week, you got a copy of the revised version. I hope you've had a chance to look through it. It still looks very similar. You guys had some great suggestions that we incorporated, so I thought I would just go over a little bit about that. So first of all, the strategic plan itself, its whole purpose was to find a way for us to really leverage the power of the network. So this was really about us finding ways that we had things in common that we were championing. So we're the pioneers of being state-based student success motivators, and we have agreed that we will be more effective in our roles if we collaborate together and we share. And I think it's really neat, even just hearing the conversations earlier this afternoon, that we're already stepping up how much we're collaborating together and sharing ideas and documents and PowerPoints. So I really appreciate some of the community that we have together. So we're developing a network of practice, right? And we're all committed to dramatically improving student success and the equity across those success measures. And so I think what the plan does, what's great about the plan is that it is broad enough that it gives lots of space for all of us. So we might be playing out our bringing coherence to the student success agenda. We may be playing that out differently at each state, but it's broad enough that it's a broad enough tent that all of us can fit under. And yet it's specific enough that we have some things we can measure about the contributions we're making together. I think when we entered this, there was no expectation that every single center would do every single point on this. I think we all have full-time jobs and couldn't possibly do everything, but that it has components of a lot of great work that centers are doing. And so with that, we have put together these 4 objectives and sets of measures. Lexi, can you go to the next slide for me? Thank you. So we're executing this plan around some ideas that we would like to promote. We want to make sure that this network really comes together and gels around a purpose that we can help evolve. We can dream together what we'd like this network to be next, and that we can help create that. And we want to be able to measure the impact that we're making in our states and collectively. So we know that many of us are playing sort of a long-term play that could be more difficult to measure, like graduation rates or students getting jobs in the fields that they studied, sort of long-term data collection. But together we can think of some shorter-term wins and showing and documenting the impact that our centers are having on student success. And I think that there's also a lot of knowledge that's being developed, a lot of products that are being produced that we have opportunity to share with each other and lift up each other's work in doing so. And so when we start this, and Lexi, I'm going to pass it to you here in the next 2 slides, we wanted to not plow a new row, but to really capitalize on the momentum of who we are and who we're becoming together and rallying around this theory of change that JFF has this great visual on.
Great. Thanks, Cynthia. I think that's exactly it. We don't want to recreate the wheel. We want to keep building on pieces that we've already worked together to put together, and one of those is the center theory of change, and that was developed to help illustrate how centers are driving institutional transformation, policy change, and improvements in student outcomes. And that's essentially what the plan is all about as well, right? So part of the goal is to be more explicit about the resources and activities needed to achieve those goals, so we can think about what does that look like in an individual center, and then how do we as a network translate that up, and how do we kind of grapple with that together, and what does that look like? And so having a standard theory of change across the network will help us to talk about what we're doing nationally to describe how centers within the network are scaling individual state-focused comprehensive reform. But again, what does that look like when you come together and that all bubbles up? So this supports the network's goal of being identified as a national leader in scaling institutional transformation because, it's helping us to talk in consistent language about the ways that centers operate, your core activities, and the impacts of what you're achieving. And again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Next slide. And then this piece we also wanted to highlight as well. I think this is a graphic that you've all seen before. We're a network of networks, and we recognize that we're an onion, right? Like this is many layers, and the more you pick them apart, the more networks you find. So the strategic plan is designed to serve as a framework for both the national network and the state network. So if we're doing this right as we work on it together, again, we can figure out what this looks like in each of these instances. So the strategic plan, this multi-year mega strategy, as it's called, for the network, acts as both a scaffold for each center to contribute its related state-based activities and collectively as the national benchmark for higher ed reform. So again, this is getting at the piece of how all of these layers are connected. So the plan itself, which you'll hear more about from Jennifer in a minute or two, the plan itself defines a broad set of objectives and ways to measure those collective accomplishments. So it's designed to be very nimble and flexible and allow for multiple entry points for each center based on your specific state context and the work that you're doing. So this should be something that you can see your center entering into in a way that makes sense for you. And finally, the plan leverages our network of networks by laying out a strategy for guiding, expanding, measuring, and spotlighting institutional change while informing the national priorities for policy, convenings, TA design, knowledge development, and all of those good pieces. So again, we hope that as you hear more of the updates about the objectives and the measures that you see yourself in this. So again, feel free to share questions or comments about that in the chat. I'm going to turn it over just very quickly to Cynthia for one more slide, and then Jennifer, I think you're on deck after that.
Yeah, so I just want to mention about the mission and vision. It's nearly the same as you saw in January. It has a few word tweaks, and then there were some good suggestions about maybe shortening it so that it's more memorable and that we can all sort of have as our flag. And so the Student Success Center Network is dedicated to comprehensive college reform and to dramatically and equitably increase post-secondary credentials. So maybe at one point we'll all be able to recite that without error, but I think that the thing that it gives us, so very much what Lexi was saying, is sort of a flag in the sand kind of thing of this is the one thing that we all agree that it's all of our missions in our state and together as a network. And then the network vision then is a more lengthy sentence or set of sentences that really just plays off of some of the details of that mission statement. So it includes things about how we value equity and that we want to start moving into dialing in labor market into our vocabulary and connecting employment to credentials more closely. And that we want to have this broad national conversation. We want to be leading this broad national conversation on student success. And so then with the last slide for me before we move to Jennifer is about our value statement. I wanted to just point out some changes that happened here. These were just sentences before, and someone had said, you know, usually value statements are just one word that are very easy to remember, and so we changed this to wow, us, and collaboration. This is describing out what we believe is our core values. We believe that everything we produce, whether it's in our state or collectively for each other, that we want it to be top-notch, like the best. High quality, lots of deliverables and achievement that we can lift each other up with. And then us, of course, empowering, encouraging each other. That there's nothing about this network that is competitive. It's like the opposite of that, that we're about empowering and encouraging each other. When one succeeds, we all benefit from that success. And then lastly, in collaboration, that, again, this is about us helping each other succeed, and that means that we freely share. I think there used to be a sort of an academic attitude around I produce this and it's my sort of academic my property. And that's the opposite of us too. We're about collaborating and sharing. See how we share freely across whether it's via email or calling each other, or going to each other's states. So we are going to continue moving forward, being committed to wow us in collaboration.
Great.
And that's it for me.
Thanks, Cynthia. All right, Jennifer, we'll kick it over to you and go to the next slide.
Great, thanks. So the next slide is about, the next several slides are about the objectives that we all had a chance to work on a little bit in January. So there are 4 objectives, if you'll remember, for the strategic plan, and those of you who weren't able to weigh in just yet, the executive directors came together in January to talk through the 4 objectives of the strategic plan, and we'll go through each of them a little bit. I know many of you have received an updated copy. We have great new sort of insight into putting the deliverables and measures up with the actual objectives. So you'll see that a little bit of a change from earlier copies, those of you who have seen the earlier copies. So we're really excited about that because we can look at the objective and then some of the elements of the objective and the deliverable we're using to measure the objectives right together. So on the slide, you'll see objective number 1 is about growing and sustaining our network as a national leader. As Cynthia mentioned and Lexi mentioned, we really want this to be part and parcel of what we're doing together, and then building that infrastructure that keeps the collaboration and the learning among centers strong. So in objective number 1, all of our elements are focused on sort of building that collaborative and peer-to-peer learning network. So in the first, sort of 1.1, you're looking at identifying what we can do to show that we are a leader, and the areas that also coincide with deliverables and measure are looking at publications and presentations. Many of the executive directors and staff are presenting across the country and at conferences and workshops, and really to sort of understand where those integrations are and really mentioning the network in those situations. This objective can help us with that. And then in the second area is really facilitating collaboration to increase our capacities and professional development among the centers, really working to build center-to-center support and looking at things like mentoring and peer learning to do that. And then in the third area, we're looking at sustainability for the network. I know that some of our services are in the sustainability area, looking at how do we develop that for the network beyond just our centers. So those are the areas that Objective 1 covers in terms of the strategic plan. Greg will cover in a little bit how we can get a little more granular in this and actually develop some strategies and tactics around this work in the future. So that is really, Objective 1 is about supporting each other. So if we can go on, Lexi, to the second objective. Actually, go back for 1 second. Greg and Cynthia, I meant to mention, do you have anything you two would like to add to that? Because I know that you worked in the groups with the EDs in these objective areas.
So I was at the table, this is Cynthia, I was at the table in January on this objective, and I will just mention for when we have our conversation later about your potential participation in a committee that would work on these objectives, I have a whole set of notes and great suggestions that came from that table that I want to pass that committee. Lots of ways to be published and do presentations together and that sort of thing.
Great. Thanks, Cynthia. Greg, was there anything you wanted to add to Objective 1?
Nope, that's perfect. Thanks.
Great. So if we want to move on to Objective 2, and I think if you have questions, if you can put them in the chat box, that will be great. If not, we can always answer or clarify things offline after the webinar. So for Objective 2 is really about facilitating some of the work that we're doing, the institutional transformation work across the states, but really understanding we all, as Lexi said earlier, have local contexts and stakeholders within our network of networks. So really what we wanted to accomplish with Objective 2 is support our commitments in the areas of critical pathways readiness, guided pathways implementation at scale, and then evaluating and improving on the pathways practices as we move forward. We're learning a lot even now today than was known several years ago. So we really want to continue to support each other in this work. Many of us have come together to talk about how we run Guided Pathways Institutes. We can do more as a network to support each other in this and then actually expand the work. I know an example of that is some of the demonstration project work we're doing together. So the deliverables and measures on this are basically surrounding numbers of colleges working in institutional reform practices, in readiness capacity, for pathways, implementing pathways at scale, and then improving the scaled pathways. And then we're looking at things like how do you scale essential practices together? How do we understand what some of the scale of adoption assessments and other assessments are in our state, but then also as a network? And finally, we talked a little bit about this, and it was referenced that maybe in the next post-secondary meeting is how are we aligning these activities and credentials to labor market data? How do we actually look at the full pipeline for pathways? So objective 2 is really about how are we looking at us as a network as it relates to some of the core framework of work that we are doing in the centers. So I'm going to pause here and ask Cynthia and Greg if they wanted to jump in with any other suggestions or comments that they know about objective 2. Great.
Nope, go ahead.
Nope, you're good? Okay, great. So moving on to objective 3. So this is an objective that many of you have seen. Some of you, this might be new for, is that looking at the policy perspective for the network. And in particular, how do we look at promoting institutional and state and federal policy that really benefits our students and helps enable the infrastructure for transformational change. But, excuse me, keeping the local autonomy that many of our campuses and states need. So these 2 areas of focus for this objective have to do with our governing boards for our community colleges, many, and local governance, local governance activities within Pathways Reform, and then also looking at informing and advocating for state and federal policy for institutional implementation of that reform. And I think we earlier mentioned that JFF did a 15-state policy scan. These kinds of things can really help inform our network and then also the work we have in each of our states. So some of the deliverables and measures on this are the numbers of trustees attending Pathways training and developing action plans in guided pathways for some states, and then in other states, it's the number of the colleges in the states that are analyzing some of their policies, particularly in pathways, and the number of, the increase of the volume in knowledge of and research in forming advocacy and statewide policy. I think it's really some of the things that groups, especially the group that we had of EDs that were looking at this, but realizing that a lot of our centers are doing policy work in a very different way. So some centers are really advocating heavily for policy with a big P, and some centers are looking more to incentivize practices on the campus level, maybe some smaller policy institution-wide, but as impactful as some of the statewide policy and really moving change on a campus for the reforms we're looking at. So I think policy has many different meanings, and what we want to make sure, and we remind everybody that is part of the network, that you may have some pieces of all of this work in your center, but there may be other things that you're not as focused on. So these objectives are meant to help, help the focus for centers in a variety of ways. So I'm going to pause here and see if Greg or Cynthia had anything they wanted to add to the policy objective number 3, policy focused.
The conversations that we had about objective 3 at our last meeting, I think, really illustrate the need or desire for some folks to connect between states in terms of policy, to see what others are doing, but with the policy scan supporting that, but beyond that, to sort of think ahead towards what are the things that are coming out in states, what are the things that might be useful to replicate in other states, but also collectively, I think, either at the federal level or some other level, if we think about things that might support this work sort of nationally, I think that might be a direction that this heads in as well, and that was certainly a topic of interest when we had those conversations.
Great, thanks, Greg. Yeah, that was definitely at our table too, sort of the need for some of the advocacy work on the larger scale. Cynthia, was there anything that you wanted to add on the policy side? I know your state has done quite a bit of work in the trustee area of supporting that work.
We have, and we're happy to share. So if there are other centers that are doing this work, I would love to hear what you're doing and what we might be able to collaborate on. So, yes, I like this objective suits us well.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I know our state wants to do a little bit more in this area, so I think we can all benefit from understanding a little bit more of how we view policy and what kinds of policies we can continually as a network support and really show that there are ways for our campuses to use policy in the areas of supporting student success activities, particularly pathways. If we could go to the next slide, Lexi, and the final slide, or I'm sorry if it's not Lexi, whoever's doing the slides, thank you. So objective 4 is really about data and a bit about equity. So we looked at this as how do we, as a network, support using disaggregated student success measures, how do we look at institutional assessment to inform equitable student outcomes, and this it definitely provides more of a critical foundation for scale and what we're learning from some of the research that has been out there in terms of what the pathways work in particular, but other student success work needs in the areas of helping students of color and low-income students and in the all students movement. So I think the two areas of focus really is looking at how data can be used in this work, key performance indicators, the scale of adoption, student characteristics that we look at for disaggregation, the Community College Survey of Student Engagement. I think they're coming out with a lot of mindset work too. How do we use all of this data and research to support us as a network and then support the work that we have in our states and within our colleges? And then, the other areas to really inform the practice and policy reform through knowledge development and research. So really, and I think I'm going to, once we're done here, we can talk a little bit about this in further detail, but sort of the idea of a shared way of developing a knowledge development and research agenda. So not just looking at the existing data, but are there things that there are gap areas that we need to know more about as we continue to implement this work. And the deliverables and measures kind of fall into these lines as well, increasing student success and equity outcomes for diverse student groups. How do we look at that when we're talking about disaggregated data and common data points like key performance indicators and early momentum student indicators, pathways, milestones? How many states and colleges are adopting some of these key performance indicators? And then the increase in states and colleges that are administering scale of adoption assessment. We know that's a growing group of colleges, and in the demonstration project, obviously, we're looking to do more support there. But really kind of how do we use what's out there to support the work, but really learn from it as well. And I know there's a lot of question and ideas on aligning different data sets, key performance indicators, in the post-secondary data partnership that goes along with some of this work. So how do we as a network join in our voices and understanding and using this particular focus for our work as we move forward. So I'm going to pause because, Cynthia, I know you had some thought in this process too in terms of the network knowledge development research agenda. Did you want to add something there with this?
I think you nailed it, friend. I think that's exactly right, about us just sharing together, learning together.
Great. And Greg, was there anything else you wanted to add to any of the data and equity pieces of Objective 4?
Nope, I'm in agreement. Good job.
Great. So you have, the three of us, sort of our perspectives on the objectives. Obviously, we're hoping when I transition to Greg very shortly, he'll talk a little bit about how more voices can be in the process, even greater to move some of these objectives forward, and even more some of them if we find some of them need some edits and changes as we move forward as a network. So I'm going to just stop here and actually ask if anyone else wanted to weigh in, Lexi or Stacy, on the objectives before transitioning to Greg.
I'm going to very quickly, Stacy, do you want to weigh in, and then I have one piece? Nope. Okay, great. I want to open it up very quickly, just if folks have clarifying questions about the objectives or deliverables and measures before we move to the next piece on how we're hoping to get you all involved. So feel free to either unmute yourself or put your question or comment in the chat, and we can spend a few minutes making sure that we are all on the same page. Keep it open for just another second if folks have any questions or comments. All right. Well, the chat is always open, so we're gonna move to the next slide, and Greg, we'll kick it over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So let's talk about getting involved in this work. So we want to make sure that this is a very broad conversation with as many voices as possible, as has been described. So the next step that you're going to see is that you are going to get an email with a survey, and we're going to ask you to fill out some information that helps us understand how you are most interested in getting involved in some work. The work will be divided into 4 committees that will be focused on the 4 different objectives and goals of the strategic plan. So think about the 4 strategic plan objectives that you just heard about and the goals of those objectives, or how we're going to measure those objectives, and start thinking about which ones, hopefully 1 or 2, that you might be most interested in. And we're going to give you a chance in the survey to sort of rank them and give us a sense of what you'd like to most be involved in. We are encouraging all executive directors to join a committee so that we have a full voice of all the executive directors across the 4 groups. And for some of the EDs to consider volunteering to be the lead of a committee. So if that is something that interests you, that will also be something that you can indicate in the survey that you'll be receiving. So please consider that as well. We are also hoping to broaden the number of voices that we're hearing from. So in particular, we know that we're talking about 4 groups, and that's about 4 EDs a group at best when we have a full staffing of EDs across all states. So please start thinking about recommending another person from your center if that's appropriate for your center, if that's the structure that you have in your state. Somebody who's deeply involved in the center's daily work, so that person can also join a committee. So think about somebody who is also dedicated to comprehensive college reform to dramatically and equitably increase post-secondary credentials. Yes, I've already memorized the mission, as I expect all of you are dutifully doing right now. Also, when you're thinking about somebody to join in, think about somebody who's sort of, I think we described it in our calls with the NLT as, either the second in command that you have or someone else who is deeply embedded into the work. So think about that and think about nominating someone to join. The more voices we have from all the states, the better off we'll be. So again, when you get the survey, if you have a second person who should also fill out the survey, please ensure that they complete the survey as well. I think that's it for that slide. So the goals of the action committee that you're going to see once you are on a committee is to execute the plan first and foremost, start the process where we're actually doing what we're aiming for in the strategic plan, or collaborating towards aligning the center work, or not aligning the center work, but putting the center work together so that that the various states are represented in the plan as we develop it. That includes making sure that folks have a chance to, via this group, collaborate in developing the plan, think about what the goals should be, to, as Jennifer described, edit and amend some of the things that we've already written as needed, because this should be a living document. And I'll also highlight here again as well that when we built this document, it has a time span. It's not finalized yet, but it's also for a specific period of time, I think about 3 years or so, if I've got that right. And so we're also thinking about this as sort of the first step or first phase of the action plan. So some of the work of these action committees probably will inform future phases of a strategic plan as well. Obviously, we'd want the committees to be thinking about how JFF services and resources can be maximizing the results of the execution of the plan itself. So that's going to be a goal of the committees as well. And designing and dreaming all the big things that we know that we individually do collectively, so that we can build the network, grow the network, make it stronger than it is now, towards better outcomes for students across the country. So you'll see these four again in the survey. This will be information that you have in front of you when you're thinking about what you might want to aim for in terms of your participation. I think that's the end of that slide too. And the timeline for this, so over the next month and a half or so, we are going to set the committee membership. The NLT and JFF will be working together to figure that out and assigning leads to the groups. And then we're dividing the action going forward into quarters in terms of what the groups will do and the deliverables for those quarters. So in that first quarter, roughly between now or July, June, July, and October, you're going to be first working at the July meeting, as has been described earlier in the conversation, to start building the work as your group begins to convene, drafting actions over that quarter, and preparing to finalize actions quarter by quarter, ending in October, January, April, and July. So that should be, there'll be regular goals that we'll have at intervals and an opportunity for groups to report out on what they've done over that period, and for others to weigh in so that these groups aren't just working in isolation, but that everyone network-wide has the opportunity to provide feedback about what's happening in the four groups. And then I think the last slide in my area is just focus on one of the next slide there. Okay, this is just, again, a sample of the action plan. So this is going to look familiar to you in terms of what we've used at our last meeting and what we will be using going forward in terms of how we're going to organize the work and make sure that folks are looking at similar goals and purposes and topics and steps, and that's all organized. So we will continue to help with the leadership of that. So that's a ton of information, and I assume that we want to pause here again and have an opportunity for people to jump in with anything in particular,
yes,
especially about volunteering or other people volunteering and all of that.
Yep, so we are open. The chat is open. Also, feel free to unmute if you have questions, comments, concerns, if you want to share your excitement about joining a committee.
And if anybody's having trouble unmuting themselves, just send us a ping in the chat and I will unmute you.
Thanks, Becky.
Hey, can everybody hear me? It's Jake from New Jersey.
Hey, Jake.
Hey, everybody. I don't have a question. I just want to commend the leadership team. You folks have done a wonderful job with this. This is really sensational, and there are a lot of connections to what we're trying to do with our Success Center in New Jersey to all of this. So kudos to all of you. This is really, really, really great. Thank you.
Anyone else, questions or comments? All right, well, while folks are thinking, I'll jump in with one additional piece as well. As we think about how to build out the action committees and how to use our time together both virtually and in person, you will also have support from members of the JFF team in doing that. So if you are thinking about joining a committee when we set up the survey, and if you have ideas or questions or anything you want to share about kind of how we can also continue to engage and support that work in different ways, feel free to share that feedback with us as well. I think we're envisioning something like each committee will have a JFF representative as well to help support the broader work of the group. So if there's anything around that you want to share feedback on, we're open to hearing that. This is a new and exciting adventure for all of us to be going into together. So we're really looking forward to that and to your feedback. So we'll continue to keep it open for questions.
I would like to build off of what Lexi and Jake were just saying. So if you're wondering what kind of role JFF may have in this work, up to date or moving forward, I want to share that. a little bit about what we're thinking now. And as Lexi said, we're open to ideas moving forward. So to date, Lexi and I have been working intimately with the network leadership team to examine the process and the content for the strategic plan and how to really create mechanisms for realizing the goals there, as well as examining areas of overlap and opportunity in the content of the strategic plan. And the second area is, as Lexi alluded to, she and I are looking right now for to examine opportunities for where JFF team members, where it may be appropriate for us to partner with you all on the committees and how we will work together moving forward. And then the third areas of our partnership with you all will be to, as you put together plans for the different objectives, as you really examine the priorities there and opportunities, we want to work with you to figure out how to operationalize those. So that could look a lot of different ways, but a couple of ways are looking at the current services and adjusting or aligning those. And other ways may be on the far end of the spectrum, which would be doing co-fundraising together to look at the next phase of our work into the years ahead, and everything in between. So we'll be along in step with you, and looking forward to figuring out how to take this step forward, and just want to thank the network leadership team as well for really creating this foundation for us to build off of. And then we'll see where this goes over the next couple months, and as we come together in July, we'll have a lot to connect on and build off of there as well. Thanks.
Great.
Stacey and Lexi, this is Jennifer. I just want to say really thanks to both of you, because having this level of engagement with the work, I think it's been, I speak on behalf of just me, I wouldn't speak on behalf of Cynthia and Greg, but it's been very helpful to really feel connected to the network and to really give back to the network. So I think this is a great opportunity. And just a plug for executive directors to think about being a part of the network leadership team. It's been really valuable, and I think Lexi's support of us, of the network leadership team, has been amazing. So really thanks to Lexi for keeping us online and really keeping us focused, and she's done an amazing job with that. So we just want to make sure Lexi gets a little bit of a shout out in this, because she really does help corral. I mean, the doodle polls alone for 4 people or 5 people is ridiculous.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the plug for joining the NLT. We're really nervous but excited about what phase 2 looks like, and again, this opportunity happening at the same time as the opportunity to join an action committee, I think it's great. Folks can figure out what makes the most sense for them to engage in, what are you most interested in, so we're really excited to see where this goes, and really appreciate everyone's time and dedication to this. I think the winter meeting, the morning conversation was phenomenal, so I'm really looking forward to July and everything we do before that. So we'll continue to keep it open for a few minutes if anyone else has questions or comments. I'm also looking at the JFF team too. I don't know if you all have anything else you want to share.
This is Andrea. I just wanted to share that as we're thinking about the different committees and engaging with each other, there's also, we've been talking with our partners across the field, the different service providers that you're all working with, and we're keeping them in the loop, and also want to think about how to engage them. So I just put that out there as, as different committees are taking shape and thinking about this column of who needs to be included, and, just sort of consulted, that the providers and partners that we're working with across the field are really excited to walk along with us, in this process. Thanks.
We got a quick question from Elizabeth in Oregon about the timeline for the next phase of the NLT. That's a great question, Elizabeth. We're going to send out more information in next week's digest. The short answer to that is We are hoping to send out the letter of interest form. It's a fairly short form for folks to fill out if you have an interest in joining. We'll send that out in the next week or two. And then we are hoping to work with folks who have applied, make final decisions in June, and then announce the next phase at the summer meeting in July, with that work starting September 1st. So we're trying to get all this out kind of now so we can build in additional transition time and make sure that we really are doing that intentionally and not taking away from all of the work we're also asking you to do on the strategic plan. Great. Any other questions? We'll keep it open for another minute or two, and then I think we can give you back 15 minutes of your day.
All right. People are thinking, this is Jen, I'm just going to do a few closing announcements. So Becky is going to help me put a brief 4-question feedback survey in the chat. So I'm hoping you can all take 30 seconds to fill that out now on how this virtual meeting today went. And that will spare us all another email with us asking you for your thoughts, but we want to make sure that you get a quick chance to let us know how you thought the format and topics of this virtual meeting went today. And so while you are all filling that out, I'll just say quickly, so what's coming up, we know that by the end of May, you all are working on filling out the center progress dashboard that was sort of debuted and workshopped at the January Austin meetings. So again, feel free, your state team, as well as Rachel McDonnell and RFA have some time to help you and support you filling that out if you have any questions on that. And we'll also be able to adjust our usual center update template. So we usually ask you for updates on your work so that we can share out at our 2 biannual meetings. So we'll be able to adjust that center update template form with the information because we're receiving information already from your dashboard. So we just wanted to share that we're hoping not to ask you for duplicate information, but we'll be using the information that you share in your dashboard to help with those center updates. And just to summarize some announcements at the beginning of the webinar, there's a lot of peer learning and sharing center examples in the coming months. So we have the Q2 virtual meeting in June, thinking about some of these topics for the July meeting as well. So keep letting your state teams and letting JFF know the topics that are of interest to you and working on setting up peer learning for that. And then in closing, so as Greg, Jennifer, and Cynthia mentioned, you'll be receiving an email with a link for the survey to sign up for a strategic plan subcommittee. And executive directors, again, you'll be free to tap others who help you with your center work to serve on that. So that survey will be coming from the network leadership team, and then a digest from JFF at the beginning of next week. So with that, we'll leave it open for a few minutes if anyone has any additional comments or questions. And again, hopefully everyone who's logged on to WebEx will be able to see the survey link in the chat. And if you're just joining us by phone, we'll also send out the survey link in the digest so you can give us your thoughts then. Awesome. So we'll stay on for a few minutes if anyone has any individual questions, but if not, thank you all so much for your time and your participation. We look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks, everyone.